Shalom. So first and foremost, I do want to give all praise, all honor, and all glory to Yahweh by Shem Shai, by Shemar Dash, the born to the apostles, and also great millstone for teaching us his true peace and blessings to the whole land of Israel. Yahweh is the name of the Honey Father Hebrew, by Shem is the name, Yahweh Shai is the name of the begotten Son. Back on lesson, and as you see within the title, we're going to be going to the destruction and how it's going to be via these thermonuclear missiles. As you've seen the various steps being taken towards World War III, these tensions that are continuing to build. As you see with this Iran, Israel, and U.S. situation, how that is continuing to get murky. But it's further going to show it's all through sprint power of Yahweh B'Shem Shai, all in order to reach that breaking point, which is ultimately going to be World War III, which we're going to get throughout the scriptures, and ultimately going to what this war is ultimately going to be by the way of. It's ultimately going to be a thermonuclear war, And I got some, gifts in the background. See, explosions going off. And that's also mentioned within the scriptures, going to that, the heavens being rolled together as a scroll. Which, speaking of these mushroom clouds being formed from these explosions, which, getting to these scriptures at hand, because one of the main points I was wanting to go into, which I was actually going to title lesson, the arrows, in the Bible are, speaking of these missiles, or, some to that effect. But I think, the one I got right there is, a better title. But I want to go into that point of how it's not, speaking of no regular, bow and arrow. Because as we're going to get throughout the scriptures, it's clear, it's evident. It's not speaking of that. But as Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 9 says, "For lo, I'll raise a cause to come against Babylon, an assembly of great nations from the north country, and very soon you're going to have a wide array of nations come together to go against Babylon, especially these so-called allied nations dealing with NATO." But it says, "And they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken, their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man, none shall return in vain." So you see the word arrows being brought up once again. It's not speaking of no regular, arrows. But they also made that point how they're all going to hit their mark. So this so-called golden dome, Trump is speaking about his devil's wanting to make, talking about how it's going to be the best, nuclear defense system. It's going to utterly fail, if he, gets to make it. Because I believe they haven't even, are in the process of, creating the golden dome. But let's continue on. I want to get to verse 25. Further going to show, what this war is ultimately going to be by the way of. Now, verse 25, "The Lord hath opened his armory." What do you think it means when the Lord is opening up his armory? "The Lord hath opened his armory and hath brought forth the weapons of his indignation, for this is the work of the Lord power of hosts and land of Chaldeans." You can also get in the scripture how the Lord has created the waster to destroy. So ultimately, the Lord has given this devil the knowledge, the understanding in order to create the thermonuclear missile, ultimately for their own demise, for their own destruction. But you see his devil taking pride, in creating this, nuclear weapon, thinking that he just came of this, on his own. But when you look into, what goes behind, the creation of it, is far out, But the Lord is ultimately one that gave him knowledge to create it. Once I mentioned that scripture, how the Lord has created the waster to destroy. He gave these, let's actually get that real quick. The waster to destroy. Don't want to butcher it. But it says, "Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth coals in the fire," which is going to these nuclear scientists, "and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work." What is smiths known for? Creating weaponry, swords, hammers, whatever the case may be. But in this case, speaking of these nuclear scientists and going to the creation of the thermonuclear missile. "Behold, I created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy." What do you think that is speaking of? What's a fitting image and thing for that? This nuclear missile. And look what took place back in Hiroshima. That's just one example. That destruction that was caused, where you had people's shadows literally casted upon walls. And I made a lesson, I want to say a little over a week or two ago. Went to the comparison of these, pretty much the advancements of these missiles. They call it the SAR bomb, whatever the case was. You saw this, that could take out, I forget exactly which, New Jersey, or it was either New York or New Jersey. I forget exactly, the place was, but it just goes to show just the vast radius, of the destructive capacity of these missiles, That's, another point right there. Now, second Ezra 16:13, further establishing that point, speaking of these arrows, and now it's not speaking of no regular, arrow. But it says, for strong is his right hand that bendeth the bow. His arrows that he shooteth are sharp and shall not miss, when they begin to be shot into the ends of the world. So you tell me, what regular bow and arrow can be shot from one place on the earth into the whole other side? I'll give you 2 seconds, because there is none. So going to show you, speaking of these ICBMs, these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and when you look into how far and how fast they can be, or how fast they go and how far they can be shot, it's crazy stuff. So going to show, it's not speaking of a regular bow and arrow once again. Compared to you can look up just how far the ICBMs can be shot. Can be shot from pretty much one place on Earth to the whole other side. So once again, going to show what these arrows are speaking of, as we're also going to get various other points, because you're going to have these thermal missiles likened to be likened to stars falling from heaven. Or you get Isaiah 34 is likened to a sword. So all these things is speaking of one thing. The arrows, the stars, the sword. It's all speaking of this thermonuclear missile, as we're going to get throughout these scriptures. And it should especially prove over here one more time, just from on top. For strong is his right hand that bendeth the bow. His arrows they shoot are sharp and shall not miss. So these arrows, these missiles are going to hit their mark, their destination. They're not going to collide into each other mid-air, land in the ocean, and not hit their mark. Ultimately, the Lord's going to be the one guiding it. But the arrows that he shot are sharp and shall not miss, when they begin to be shot to the ends of the world. Which is not speaking of a regular arrow. Isaiah 9:5 further establishing the point of what this what type of war this is ultimately going to be, and how it's going to be like something you've never seen before. Isaiah 9:5, and it says, for every bow of the warriors confuse noise and garments of blood. Which, examples like movie 300, dealing with the clashing of shields, swords, roaring on the battlefield. But this show you right here is going to be something completely different. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. So the pieces to the puzzle should now start to come together. Reading right here says, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. Jeremiah 50, the Lord, open up his armory. We read another scripture going to, Lord creating the waster, to destroy. We went to those arrows being shot from one place on earth and to the other side. So it's not speaking of a regular arrow, So it should start to paint that image of what this war is going to be. By the way, as also Revelations, I want to say the 11th chapter, going into the second woe is past and the third woe comes quickly, which is speaking of that third world war, and it will happen in our lifetime, in our generation, for these people that want to cope and say it's never going to happen. But Revelations 6 chapter 13 through 14, and that said, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth. Do you think it means like the literal stars are going to fall on the earth? No. It's speaking of these missiles raining down upon this place. This is where the main destruction, the main judgment is going to take place here in Babylon the Great, aka America. As well as here's the main deliverance. Or here's where is the main deliverance going to take place here in Babylon in America. That's where you have the most Israelites, gathered and stationed. You see in Scripture how Israel and Judah is pressed together. But on with the main point, verse 13, and the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casts her untimely fig, she is shaken of a mighty wind. Now that's going to those explosions, those shock waves from it. And you can also get various scriptures going to that. How you're going to have the earth quite literally shake from all these explosions. How the earth shall reel to and fro. Shall shake as a cottage. Shall pretty much move as a drunkard. When you see a drunk person, what are they doing? They're stumbling. They can't walk straight. Now, verse 14, and the heaven departed as a scroll, which I made that point earlier, which is speaking of those mushroom clouds, when it is rolled together. And every mountain and island were moved out of their places. That's another point. A few more scriptures, Isaiah 34, 1 through 6. Going to the other main point, which is going to be verse 5, but read from verse 1. Now, it says, come to you nations to hear and hearken to people that there to hear and all that are there in the world and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all the armies. He had utterly destroyed them, he had delivered them to the slaughter. So a great judgment is getting ready to befall this place. And the Lord's indignation is upon this place, its wicked inhabitants. Now the slain also shall be cast out, the stink shall come by the carcasses, and the mountain shall melt their blood. And all the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved, and heaven shall be rolled together as a scroll, what's in those mushroom clouds. And all their hosts shall fall down as a leaf falls off from the vine, and the falling fig from the fig tree. Now, verse 5, which is important, it says, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven. That sword is speaking of these thermonuclear missiles, not a literal, iron sword, coming down. And it says, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven, behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, in the word for Esau, even upon the people of my curse to judgment. And it says, the sword of the Lord is filled blood, is made fat with fatness, and with blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of kidneys of rams, for the Lord is sacrifice and Basra and a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. But that should, pretty much tie in these points together, as we just got, throughout various scriptures. You're going into ultimately these thermonuclear missiles and how it was likened unto, I used to hear a sword being bathed in heaven. Revelation 6 is likened to stars fall from heaven. We read in Jeremiah 50. As well as 2nd Ezra is going to those missiles being likened to those arrows. And once you can look into, the ICBM and see how far, those missiles, can be shot. And as I made that point, what regular bow and arrow can be shot from one place on the earth unto the whole other side? Clearly none. So it's going to show it's not speaking of that, but these nuclear missiles. Read verse 5 one more time. For my sword be bathed in heaven, behold, it shall come down upon Idumea and upon the people of my curse to judgment. So, once again, as I made that point earlier, these pieces of the puzzle now start, coming together. Because once it's all speaking of the same thing, the sword, the stars, the arrows. As we're going to further get 2 Peter 3 and 10, and various other scriptures, especially going to the destruction from these things. 2 Peter 3 and 10 is, but the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, which go into those explosions. And the elements shall melt with fervent heat. And what type of weapon or thing can emit that type of heat where it's able to melt the elements? Especially people, as you can get in Zechariah 14. Further goes into that destruction, that horrific judgment from these missiles, where you can have people literally be consumed and burned away. How their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet. As the element shall melt with fervent heat. That's why you get in the scriptures how, let's actually get there real quick, here a little, and there a little. This is Isaiah 20:10. It says, for precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little, and there a little. This is why you get in scripture, where they ask the Lord, why speak ye, to them in parables? Because it's given unto you. to know mysteries. This is Matthew 13:11. And it says, get the King James. There it is. And it says, he answered and said unto sorry, I speak too fast. He answered and said unto them, because it is given. I want to get the full chapter. Let's see. I want to get the main point I wanted to get. Now, verse 10. This is what I want to get right here. That says, and the disciples came and said unto him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? So pretty much in a riddle, pretty much. And the disciples came and said unto him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. This is why it's so hard for them to understand and grasp these things, because ultimately it's not for them. So if this is still hard to grasp and understand, hey, there's a serious problem. Because these pieces should now start to connect, as we just read throughout various scriptures. Making it crystal clear that it's not speaking of a literal sword. It's not speaking of literal arrows. What would that be likened to in today's context? The modern day arrows would be these missiles, man. That sword, speaking of these nuclear missiles, because it said, or we can also get in Revelation 6 chapter, those stars falling from heaven. And we've seen NASA or Elon Musk will do his, showcasing, launching off his rocket. And it'll be, somewhat cloudy. You can see, that light, from the ground. It looks like a star, trying to, form, and paint that image. But I want to read 2 Peter 10 one more time. Still the main point. But the day of the Lord comes a thief in the night. So unexpected to those that are not watching, those that are not paying attention, those that are not preparing for Lord Yahweh's return. And it says, in which the heaven shall pass with great noise, and the element shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works shall be burned up. I got one more scripture, Isaiah 13:19. And it's going to the destruction that will befall Babylon the Great, and how ultimately this place will never be inhabited again. So Isaiah 13:19. And it says, in Babylon, the glory of kings, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency shall be as when the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, verse 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. So, Babylon the Great will never be inhabited again. So, it's going to show just how heavy the judgment really going to be. Matter of fact, you're in the scripture going to those 200,000 missiles that are going to rain upon this place. And you're also going to have other locations to be hit also, but the main destruction, the main judgment is going to take place here in Babylon the Great, aka America. But also, do you want to get that point, ICBMs? How far? Just, going to that point. It says intercontinental ballistic missiles have a minimum range of 5,500, roughly 3,400 miles, but typically travel much farther, spanning 10,000 to over 1,500 kilometers, which is converted to 6,200 to 9,300 miles, to hit target globally within 30 to 40 minutes. Now, you tell me what arrow, literal bow and arrow, can be shot from one place on the earth onto the other side. I'll wait. Oh, there's none? Okay. As these weapons fly into space before re-entering the atmosphere, allowing them to reach nearly any target on Earth, which I should have got this earlier to go into that point dealing with for 2 16, which I would read one more time and I'll close this out. Now, so as strong as the right hand that bendeth the bow, just further pushing that point across. Now, strong as the right hand that bendeth the bow, his arrows that he shooteth are sharp, and shall not miss when they begin to be shot to the ends of the world. So clearly, not speaking of a, literal bow and arrow, but these thermonuclear missiles, I've read throughout various other scriptures, further establishing that point of ultimately what this war is going to be by the way of, which we went to that, the destruction of it, which we read in Isaiah 13, As we can also get, or we also got in Isaiah 9 and 5, going to show how this war is going to be by the way of fuel and flaming fire. I mean, the pieces should, start to come together. But that's the point right there. I don't want to drag it out, lesson out, make it longer than it be. But those are what I take to point together with my belief in you were edified. Just, thought I'd make a lesson regarding this destruction that is to come. And ultimately, what it's going to be by the way of, which is ultimately going to be via these nuclear missiles going back to the title. So that's it right there. I don't close out, give all praise.